Imagine you're standing in front of the most powerful king in China. You've walked 1,000 miles for this moment. You're here to murder him. You unroll the map, and hidden inside it is a poisoned blade. You have one chance. You lunge, you miss, and the king runs around a pillar. What happened in the next few minutes created one of the most famous phrases in the Chinese language. Let me tell you this story. During the Warring States period of ancient China, roughly 2,200 years ago, there lived a swordsman named Jing Ke. Now, very little is known about where he came from or who trained him. The historical record barely mentions his early life. But by the time he was a man, he had a reputation across the realm. He was a warrior whose skill with a blade was almost impossible to measure. Not flashy, not the kind of swordsman who boasted in taverns, the kind who moved through the world and left people alive or dead, and no one could quite explain how it happened. He lived a quiet life for a time. He spent his days in the marketplace of Puyang in the state of Wei, studying swordplay with anyone who would teach him. He spent his nights reading. He was the kind of man who seemed to exist between worlds, the scholar's world and the warrior's world, comfortable in neither, trusted by both. But something changed. At some point, Jing Ke left Wei. Now, the reasons are unclear. Perhaps he had killed the wrong man. Perhaps he had offended someone with power. Perhaps he simply needed to disappear. He fled to the state of Yan in the north, near today's Beijing. In Yan, he met a man named Gao Jianli. Now, Gao Jianli was a lute player, skilled, sensitive, the kind of musician who could make an audience cry without singing a word. They became inseparable. They would sit together in the evenings, Gao Jianli playing the lute, Jing Ke listening, and a profound friendship grew between them, the kind that makes two men feel less alone in an indifferent world. But even in Yan, the swordsman couldn't truly rest. The state was doomed. To the east lay the state of Qin, and Qin was swallowing every other state one by one. Its king, Qín Wáng Zhèng, a man who would eventually become the first emperor of all China, was relentless. His armies were unstoppable. His will was absolute. The prince of Yan, Yan Taizidan, watched his kingdom shrink with each passing season. He was intelligent, desperate, and running out of time. And he had heard the rumors about the swordsman. Prince Dan approached Jing Ke with a proposition. Now, it wasn't a request, it was a duty. There was a general in the Qin named Fan Yuqi. The general had fled Qin and was now hiding in Yan, sought by the king for treason. Prince Dan had an idea. If they sent this general's head to the Qin king as a sign of peace, as a gesture of surrender, the king would be pleased. The king would lower his guard, and when Jing Ke was admitted into the throne room to present a map of the province of Yan to the king, that would be the moment. The dagger would be hidden inside the rolled map. The map unrolled, the blade would fall. When the blade fell, the king would die, and Yan would be saved. It was an almost impossible plan, but it was the only plan left. Jing Ke asked to think. He spent days walking. He spent nights alone. He knew what he was being asked to do. He knew that whether he succeeded or failed, he wouldn't be coming home. He went to find Gao Jianli. Now, there are different accounts of this meeting, but the most famous version is the one that has survived for 2,000 years. They met at the river called the Yi, near the ancient town of Yishui. Gao Jianli brought his lute, sat by the water's edge as the sun began to fall. Gao Jianli played, and Jing Ke sang, a song that has become one of the most famous poems in Chinese history. 风萧萧兮易水寒，壮士一去兮不复还。The wind blows cold, the Yi River runs clear, the hero departs, never to return. The melody was mournful. Jing Ke's voice was steady. When the song ended, both men understood. This was goodbye. Jing Ke accepted the mission. But there was a problem. Prince Dan wanted Jing Ke to have a companion, someone to help him if things went wrong. Jing Ke chose a man named Qín Wáng, famous in his own right as a warrior. Now, according to legend, Qín Wáng had killed a man in a single combat at the age of 13. At that age, people said he had already crossed into the territory of the legendary and the impossible. But there's a gap between being a killer and being an assassin. One is what you do in rage or self-defense. The other is what you do in cold blood, in front of a king, in the moment when everything depends on absolute control. Jing Ke understood this. Qín Wáng did not. They prepared for weeks. They had no poison for the dagger, at least not the kind that would drop a man instantly. So they coated the blade with the deadliest substance they could find, toxin from the lungs of a legendary sea creature. A single cut would be enough. The plan was set. They would take the general's head in a lacquered box. They would roll the map around the dagger, and they would walk into the throne room of the first emperor of Qin. They traveled to Qin by an indirect route, staying on the back roads, moving carefully. When they arrived at the capital, they sent word. The Prince of Yen wanted peace. He was sending an envoy with the head of the traitorous general, proof of his loyalty, and a map showing which lands Yen would surrender. The king of Qin received them. The throne room was massive. Guards lined the walls. The king sat elevated, unreachable, or so he thought. Jing Ke and Qín Wáng entered slowly. As they approached, Qín Wáng's face went pale. His hands began to shake. The king noticed. Something was wrong. The guards stirred. Jing Ke turned to Qín Wáng without hesitation. He spoke, his voice calm, explanatory. In the Northlands, Jing Ke said, people are not used to your capital. He is afraid. He means nothing by it. I will present the gifts alone. The king relaxed. A moment had passed. The assassination attempt survived its first crisis because Jing Ke understood something essential, that confidence is more believable than the truth. Now, Jing Ke held the leather case. He bowed, and he began to unroll the map. He unrolled it and unrolled it. The king, curious, leaned forward to see which lands the prince was surrendering. And then the map ran out. The dagger fell into Jing Ke's hand. In that instant, in that moment, when the hidden weapon revealed itself, Jing Ke moved. He had trained his whole life for this single second. He lunged. The king's reflexes were faster than calculation. He stood. The dagger missed. It was close. Historians say close enough to draw blood, but it missed. The king ran. Now, the king's sword was long, designed for ceremony and power, not for combat. In close quarters, in a throne room, such a blade was unwieldy. He couldn't draw it quickly, so he ran around a pillar, Jing Ke pursuing, the dagger raised, the moment stretching like something alive and breathing. A doctor traveling with the court threw his medicine bag at Jing Ke. It was a small thing, no more than a distraction, but it was enough to slow him for an instant. The king finally drew his sword. He turned, and in that turning, in that single moment of hesitation that Jing Ke allowed, whether from mercy or from the calculation that a living captive might be worth more than a dead symbol, the king's blade flashed. It cut Jing Ke's thigh. Jing Ke, bleeding, threw the dagger. It flew through the air and missed. It struck the pillar behind the king and dropped to the ground. Jing Ke walked backward to the pillar and leaned against it. And then, with his lifeblood seeping into the marble floor, he laughed. The guards killed him. It took many of them, but they killed him. Qín Wáng died first, cut down before he could even move. In the aftermath, the king of Qin issued an edict. The state of Yen was no longer worthy of negotiation. He would destroy it utterly. Within 10 years, Yen had fallen. Its territory was absorbed into Qin. Prince Dan was executed. The assassination had failed. It had failed by inches. It had failed by the reflexes of a man and the fear of a companion and the throw of a doctor's medicine bag. But it didn't matter, because Jing Ke had walked into history knowing he wouldn't leave. And he had left behind an idiom that would echo through 2,000 years of Chinese language. 图穷匕见. The map unrolls, the dagger appears. It means the moment when hidden intentions become impossible to conceal, the moment when the truth reveals itself, the moment when all the careful planning, all the false smiles, all the ceremony falls away. Gou Jianli, the lute player, heard that his friend was dead. He didn't disappear into grief. Years later, he disguised himself as a laborer, entered the Qin court, and swung a lead-weighted lute at the king's head. He missed. They killed him too. 2 friends, 2 attempts. The same king survived both. The wind blows cold, the Yi River runs clear. The hero departs, never to return again. If you know someone who's ever taken a shot at something impossible and missed, share this video with them. They will love this story. Jing Ke hid a blade inside a map and nearly killed the most powerful man alive. But there's an ancient Chinese story that's even more unsettling, and almost no one has heard it. Click on this thumbnail right now and watch it. And now that you've made it this far and you're still watching the video, here is the secret password: map. Start your comment with this word and I'll reply to you. And until next time, 再见!